At 7:42 p.m., the lights went out inside Redwood Correctional Facility, a maximum security prison holding over 2,000 inmates. Within minutes, a routine lockdown turned into one of the most violent uprisings in recent years. Officials called it a spontaneous outbreak, but witnesses inside said something else. It was planned. By the time order was restored, 4 inmates were dead. 2 officers were hospitalized, and the questions were just beginning. Who started it? Was it gang warfare, a failed negotiation, or a setup from the inside? Tonight, we're going beyond the headlines, breaking down how a single spark inside a pressure cooker of fear, control, and neglect ignited a full-scale rebellion. This is breaking down the latest prison riot, what really happened. And once you see what led up to it, you'll realize this wasn't just a riot. It was a message. Title card fades in. A Behind Bars TV. Original documentary, The Countdown to Chaos. Every riot starts long before the first punch is thrown, and this one was no exception. Redwood Correctional had been on edge for months. Staff shortages, food shortages, power issues, a system stretched to breaking point. Sources tell Behind Bars TV that tensions escalated after a surprise cell search targeting one of the prison's most powerful groups, the East Side Lords, a hybrid gang controlling the commissary trade inside. For administrators, it was a victory. For inmates, it was an act of war. The following day, whispers started traveling. Through taps on walls, folded kites, passed under doors, and coded conversations at chow time. According to one confidential informant, everyone knew something was coming. You could feel it. Nobody said it out loud, but every inmate could hear it in the air. By Friday afternoon, tension had reached its peak. A guard on duty later told investigators, "It was too quiet. When it's that quiet, something's about to happen." And then, the lights flickered. Just for a second. But that was all it took. Power loss triggered automatic door overrides, a glitch that unlocked 6 cells in North Wing C, one of the most volatile units in the facility. Within 90 seconds, the entire block was in motion. The riot had begun. But to understand why it happened, we have to go deeper. Because this wasn't chaos for chaos's sake. It was a reaction to something much bigger. A buildup of pressure that had been ignored for years. Anatomy of a riot. At 7:43 p.m., 3 minutes after the power surge, chaos erupted simultaneously across 2 wings. The coordination was too precise to be coincidence. Prison intelligence analysts now believe the East Side Lords weren't acting alone. They had made an alliance with a rival gang called the Iron Wolves. Together, they planned what insiders now call the Great Diversion. While guards rushed to contain one side of the facility, a second group broke into the maintenance hall, seizing control of cleaning chemicals, metal rods, and radio keys. This was strategy, not an explosion of rage. But how do hundreds of inmates coordinate something like this in an environment where they can't talk, text, or even see each other? You'd be shocked how sophisticated prison communication is. They use hand signals, vent talk, wall taps, even chess moves. You can't stop human connection. By 7:52 p.m., multiple units were burning. Fire alarms drowned out radio traffic. The facility's perimeter lights failed, giving inmates cover under darkness. Inside, officers were overwhelmed. Fewer than 15 staff were on duty that night, guarding over 400 inmates. The prison's emergency response team wouldn't arrive for another 26 minutes. 26 minutes of unchecked chaos. For those trapped inside, both officers and inmates, those 26 minutes felt like hours. And when the doors finally locked again, 4 men were dead, dozens wounded, and a message scrawled on the cafeteria wall in soot. We warned you, inside the investigation. By dawn, Redwood Correctional looked like a war zone. Every wall told a story of panic, of rage, of survival. But investigators knew something else was buried within the ashes. Intent. Within 48 hours, the Department of Corrections launched Operation Redfall, an internal probe into how the riot started and why no one saw it coming. The lead investigator, Captain Marcus Doyle, a 25-year corrections veteran, called it a perfect storm of human error and institutional blindness. The hidden signals. When investigators combed through security footage from the week leading up to the riot, they noticed patterns. Moments that looked normal to untrained eyes, but to insiders, were loaded with meaning. Every tap, every pause, every sideways glance carried coded significance. It wasn't chaos. It was choreography. The key discovery came from Unit B, where investigators recovered scraps of paper written in kites. The covert prison notes used to pass messages through ventilation ducts or under doors. This single fragment confirmed what many officers suspected. The blackout wasn't random. It was engineered. The inside man. The next question. Who orchestrated it? To answer that, investigators followed a trail of contraband phone calls traced to a lifer named Rafael Ghost Mendez, a former shot caller for the East Side Lords. Mendez had been transferred to Redwood 6 months earlier under what one source called administrative reshuffling. But investigators later learned he brought more than just influence. He brought connections. Federal analysts later confirmed the call reached a burner phone outside the prison. One linked to a construction subcontractor working inside Redwood. In plain English, someone on the outside flipped the switch. That subcontractor, whose name remains sealed in court records, had access to electrical systems at exactly 7:42 p.m. The same moment the riot began. A brief manual override occurred in the system logs. That malfunction? It wasn't a glitch. It was the signal. The whistleblower. But even the most sophisticated plan needs a human trigger. Someone inside to make sure the timing is right. That person turned out to be Officer Carla Ruiz, a 12-year veteran of the facility. At first, Ruiz was hailed as a survivor, trapped in the chaos for hours before rescue. But her story didn't line up. In a later interview, she confessed under immunity that she'd been coerced into leaving certain doors unsecured, or my family would pay the price. Her statement exposed a truth few were willing to admit. Control inside a prison isn't always held by those wearing the badge. At Redwood, the gangs had more command than the command center itself. What the cameras missed, investigators reviewed over 3,000 hours of CCTV footage, yet the most critical moments were missing. 4 hallway cameras had been manually disconnected 2 days before the riot. The maintenance report said routine testing, but digital timestamps showed otherwise. The system wasn't being tested. It was being prepared. Experts believe the riot was planned in silence for nearly 3 months, under the guise of normal prison life. Inmates lifting weights. Officers doing rounds. A slow, haunting piano cue builds tension. Beneath that ordinary rhythm, a storm was building, and no one on the outside could hear it. The aftermath. When the dust settled, investigators submitted a 186-page report to the state legislature. The conclusion was damning. Redwood wasn't just the site of a riot. It was a mirror reflecting the collapse of a system. Inmates weren't rioting out of boredom or hate. They were reacting to years of neglect, humiliation, and fear. And once that pressure reached its limit, the outcome was inevitable. The question wasn't how the riot happened. It was why no one cared until it did. But Redwood isn't the first, and it won't be the last. The anatomy of control. To the untrained eye, every prison looks the same. Concrete, razor wire, towers, cells. But to those who've lived or worked inside, There's a hidden language here, a logic of control embedded in the walls themselves. At the heart of this design is a single idea: contain, don't connect. It's a system designed to suppress emotion, reduce visibility, and maintain dominance through environment, not empathy. The illusion of order. Every prison claims to maintain order. But inside Redwood and others like it, what exists isn't order. It's stagnation. Psychologists call it the feedback loop of confinement. When human beings are stripped of movement, choice, and sensory variation, they don't calm down. They implode. Riots aren't sudden. They're slow burn reactions to environmental oppression. Day after day, silence becomes suffocation. When you trap 2,000 men in a world built to deny humanity, it only takes one spark to remind them they're still alive. The systemic design of pressure, control in American prisons isn't just physical, it's psychological. Cells are built at calculated distances to prevent conversation. Food slots are engineered to avoid eye contact. Lighting is cold by design, a strategy to dull emotion and heighten compliance. You're watched more than you're spoken to. You're measured more than you're mentored. And after a while, you start acting like the system expects you to. The irony? The tighter the control, the more explosive the release. Sociologists have found that the most controlled prisons, the ones with strict isolation, rigid hierarchy, and minimal social programs, are also the ones most prone to violent eruptions. Because when you remove all outlets for frustration, the only outlet left is destruction. Voices of the system. We're trained to maintain order, but we're given no tools to build peace. That's the truth. Inmate. They think control equals respect, but all it builds is pressure. Pressure don't disappear, it waits. Psychologist. Prisons are sensory experiments. Too much deprivation rewires the brain. You don't get rehabilitation, you get trauma. When trauma becomes the architecture, violence becomes inevitable. The role of power and policy. Every time a riot happens, the same promises follow. More control, more security, more punishment. But control doesn't solve chaos. It breeds it. As one veteran warden put it, every riot is a policy failure disguised as inmate behavior. The truth is that no one wants riots. Not the inmates, not the guards, not even the gangs. But when every door becomes a wall and every decision is dictated by fear, riots stop being acts of rebellion. They become acts of communication. The unspoken cycle. And yet, even after Redwood, even after decades of lessons learned, new prisons are still being built from the same blueprints. Concrete, isolation, cameras, silence, all in the name of safety, but none in the name of understanding. The system doesn't evolve, it replicates. It's not a correctional system. It's an echo chamber of fear. The riot at Redwood Correctional wasn't a breakdown of control. It was control breaking down under its own weight. Because when a system built to contain human behavior refuses to confront human nature, eventually, human nature fights back. And that's the part most people will never hear. The hidden players, gangs, guards, and the politics of power. Every prison is its own ecosystem, built on power, fear, and negotiation. From the outside, it looks like a system of control, but from the inside, it's a balance of competing empire, the three kingdoms of power. Inside Redwood, three forces shaped every decision. Every riot, every alliance, every moment of peace. At the top were administrators. Warden-level officials tasked with maintaining security, minimizing cost, and satisfying political expectations. Below them, the correctional officers, the front line, enforcing order with limited authority and even less support. And finally, the inmate factions, gangs, groups, and alliances running everything from protection rackets to drug routes. Each side had power. Each side had fear. And each side needed the others to keep the machine running, the invisible government. To understand a riot, you have to understand how prison society really works. It's not chaos. It's hierarchy. A hidden government built on respect, reputation, and retaliation. Within Redwood, the most dominant faction was the East Side Lords, a multi-ethnic alliance born in California and now spread through half the state's prisons. They controlled the black market, phones, tobacco, painkillers, food, even protection. They enforced discipline where the state failed. When officers weren't looking, the Lords handled justice their way. No court, no appeal, just consequences. It's a brutal system, but in many ways it works. Because when the official system collapses, an unofficial one always takes its place. The guard's dilemma. The officers caught in the middle call it walking the wire. They're tasked with keeping peace in an environment that runs on conflict. Low pay, long hours, understaffing. The pressure wears on everyone. By the time Redwood erupted, morale among staff had already hit rock bottom. Desperate for survival, some officers looked the other way. Others joined the game. Smuggling cell phones, selling favors, tipping off certain inmates. Corruption became currency. According to the Redwood investigation, at least 4 officers were under suspicion for cooperating with gang leaders before the riot. 1 resigned quietly. 2 were transferred. Only 1 faced charges. In a system where loyalty is survival, the line between keeping order and keeping peace becomes invisible. Politics. Above the walls, every election season, politicians campaign on law and order. They push tougher sentences, more cells, fewer rehabilitation programs. It looks strong on paper, but inside the walls, it's a ticking time bomb. The result? Overcrowded tiers, exhausted officers, and inmates stacked like dominoes in concrete boxes. It's not a matter of if a riot happens, but when. And when it does, everyone points fingers. The inmates blame the guards. The guards blame the warden. The warden blames the politicians. The politicians blame criminal culture. But no one ever blames the architecture of neglect that built the tragedy in the first place. The deal within the chaos. Once the riot was suppressed, a secret round of negotiations began. Not between inmates and guards, but between leaders. According to internal memos leaked to reporters, members of the East Side Lords were quietly moved out of isolation within days. Officially, for safety reasons. Unofficially, to keep the peace. In exchange for quiet, the gangs got what they wanted most. Communication lines reopened. To outsiders, it looked like control was restored. But inside, everyone knew. Peace had a price. A former Redwood officer summed it up best. We didn't end the riot. We just changed the rules of engagement. Power never sleeps. A month later, the same sounds returned. Tapping on walls, coded whispers through pipes, faint messages sliding under doors. The system was stabilizing, but only on the surface. The real war had just adapted. In prison, control isn't about dominance. It's about balance. As long as both sides fear losing it, the system survives. But when that balance tips, when leadership fails, when politics interfere, when silence replaces dialogue, the cycle resets. This is the hidden truth of every riot. It's not chaos rebelling against order. It's order rebelling against itself. The voices left behind. When the fires are out and the cameras leave, the story doesn't end. It just gets quieter. Behind every prison riot, every flash of violence, are people left behind. Families who wait for calls that never come, officers who never return to work, and inmates who survive but never walk free inside their own minds again. The families wait. For Angela Morris, the night of the Redwood riot was the longest of her life. Her son, Derek, had been serving a 12-year sentence for armed robbery. He was 2 years away from parole. Angela. I didn't want to see him on TV. I wanted to hear his voice. That's all. Just to know he was breathing. It took 3 days for her to learn that Derek had survived. When he finally called, his first words weren't about himself. He said, "Mom, they forgot us." Forgotten. Not because the world didn't know, but because it didn't care. The officer's burden. Officer Caleb Henderson was one of the guards on duty when the riot broke out. He spent 14 years working at Redwood and nearly lost his life that night. Pinned against a barricade, he watched inmates set fire to the control room. When rescue came, he was barely conscious. His lungs burned, his arm fractured. Henderson. I used to think the inmates were the only ones trapped, but that night, I realized we're all doing time in there. After recovering physically, he never returned to work. Doctors diagnosed him with severe post-traumatic stress. Henderson. You can take the man out of the prison, but the prison never leaves the man. The inmates who lived. Among those who survived the Redwood riot, the stories vary. But the theme is always the same. Nobody wins. Inmate 1. I didn't riot to escape. I rioted because nobody listened. Inmate 2. You take a man's hope long enough, he'll burn the whole world just to see some light. For most inmates, the riot wasn't rebellion. It was the only language left when every other form of communication had been taken away. When the fire died, so did the few things that reminded them they were still human. The psychologist's reflection, Dr. Hart. People think riots come from anger. They don't. They come from neglect. Hart has spent 20 years studying prison trauma. Her findings are simple and damning. Dr. Hart. When humans are deprived of autonomy, touch, and purpose, their brains start to collapse into survival mode. Riots are the body's way of saying, I can't take this anymore. Her reports on Redwood were largely ignored by officials, but widely cited by reform advocates calling for changes to isolation policies. Dr. Hart. If you build a cage to suppress human emotion, don't be shocked when it erupts in violence. The echo after silence. 2 years after the riot, Redwood's North Wing remains closed. No repairs, no memorial, no acknowledgement. For the Department of Corrections, it's just another entry in the ledger. For those who lived through it, it's a permanent scar. You can rebuild the walls, but you can't rebuild the silence that followed. A former inmate, released months later, said it best. They cleaned the blood off the floor, but not off the memory. The voices of reform. In the wake of Redwood, advocacy groups demanded an investigation, not just into the riot, but into the system itself. Among them were former officers, ex-inmates, and family members, people who had seen both sides of the bars, all saying the same thing. This can't keep happening. For a brief moment, the conversation shifted. News outlets covered the calls for change. Lawmakers promised reform measures. But by the following month, a new story had taken over the headlines. In America, outrage is temporary, but pain is permanent. The final reflection. Prisons are meant to hold people accountable. But somewhere along the line, we stopped holding the system accountable for what it creates. Redwood wasn't just a riot. It was a mirror, reflecting everything we refuse to see. Neglect, fear, control, and somehow, the faint flicker of humanity that refuses to die. And maybe that's the lesson the walls keep trying to teach us. You can silence people. You can contain them. But you can never stop the human need to be heard. Thanks for watching Behind Bars TV. If this documentary opened your eyes, hit the like button and subscribe for more real stories from inside the world's toughest prisons. Drop your thoughts in the comments. We read every one. Stay curious, stay informed, and we'll see you in the next episode.